He thought she was just a stranger's child, until he saw the gold bracelet on her wrist, the one he gave the woman he left 5 years ago. The early afternoon sun was warm against the glass towers of Manhattan as Henry Carter stepped out of his office building, a phone pressed to his ear and a sleek leather folder tucked under his arm. He looked every bit the part of a successful CEO, his light blue tailored suit perfectly fitted, his dark hair neatly styled, and his piercing blue eyes sharp and focused. He moved with purpose, always in a rush, always calculating his next deal or strategy. That day, however, he wasn't prepared for what was about to disrupt the carefully ordered world he had built. Just as he reached the curb, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the street. It caught the folder in his arm, ripping it open and sending a flurry of papers into the air. Contracts, charts, and confidential documents fluttered like white birds across the sidewalk. Henry let out a frustrated sigh and crouched down, trying to catch as many pages as he could before they were carried off entirely. Then he heard a small voice beside him. "I'll help." Startled, he turned his head and saw a little girl kneeling beside him. She couldn't have been older than 5. Her hair was chestnut brown and tied into 2 bouncy pigtails, and her wide blue eyes, an almost perfect match to his, were filled with determination as she carefully gathered the papers and stacked them in a neat pile. She wore a white t-shirt and a denim jumper dress, her little knees brushing the pavement as she worked with surprising focus and care. Henry blinked, momentarily thrown off. It wasn't every day a stranger, let alone a child, helped him with something so mundane. He offered a polite but warm, "Thank you." The girl grinned up at him and extended the stack of papers. And that's when he saw it. A delicate gold bracelet hung loosely on her small wrist, the chain gleaming faintly in the sun. At first it was just a glint, nothing unusual, but then he saw the charm attached to it. His breath caught. It was an heirloom from his family, one of a kind, with an engraving so distinct he didn't need to read it to recognize it. He had given that bracelet to someone once. A long time ago. To Kate. His world tilted, the sidewalk beneath him suddenly unstable. His gaze darted from the bracelet back to the little girl's eyes. He couldn't form the words at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost uncertain. "Where did you get that bracelet?" The girl looked at him innocently, lifting her wrist as if it were just any other accessory. "My mommy gave it to me. She said it belonged to my daddy." Henry felt the air leave his lungs. The sounds of the city faded into a dull hum. His fingers trembled as he stared at the bracelet, at the little girl holding his documents like it was the most normal thing in the world. And then she smiled again. "My name's Emma." The name hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal or business loss ever had. There was something terrifying and beautiful in the way she stood there, calm and cheerful, completely unaware of the storm she had just unleashed inside him. Henry stood frozen on the sidewalk, still holding the last of the papers Emma had handed him, though he had forgotten about them entirely. The sounds of the city around him, the honking horns, footsteps, passing conversations, faded into a distant blur. All he could focus on was the weight of that one name, the unmistakable charm on that bracelet, and the little girl's innocent voice repeating in his mind, "My mommy gave it to me. She said it belonged to my daddy." Something deep in his chest tightened, something he hadn't felt in years, maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe hope, though it was tangled and hard to name. He crouched a little to meet her eyes. "Emma Harper?" he asked carefully, needing to be sure. The girl nodded with a bright smile and pointed across the street. "My mom's in there. In the coffee shop. She's getting me a cookie." She beamed as if this were the most exciting part of her day, unaware that her words had just detonated a buried part of Henry's past. His mouth was dry, and for a second, he felt completely unprepared for what he might find inside that cafe. He hadn't seen Kate in 5 years. The last time they spoke, they were both in tears, she was begging him to stay, and he was walking away. She had told him she was pregnant, and he hadn't believed her at first. When she showed him the test, he froze. The terror that gripped him then had nothing to do with the child or even with Kate, it was the fear that he would ruin them both, the way his own father had nearly ruined his family. He had built a life around control, discipline, success, but he didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to be present, how to love without running. So he ran. He thought he was doing the right thing at the time. He thought disappearing would be less cruel than staying and becoming a man he was afraid of becoming. He buried himself in work, changed his number, moved across the city, surrounded himself with the noise of business and status to drown out the echo of her voice in his mind. But she was never really gone. Not a day passed that he didn't think of Kate. He tried to convince himself that she'd moved on, that maybe she'd never actually had the baby, that maybe it had all been a mistake. But now Emma stood in front of him, a living, breathing confirmation of everything he had tried to bury. The same blue eyes. The same tilt of the chin when she smiled. She was his. He rose slowly, the papers forgotten in his hand. His heart pounded as he glanced across the street at the glass door of the coffee shop. He could see silhouettes moving inside. He had no idea what he was going to say, how he was going to explain, or if she would even look at him after all this time. But he had to know. He had to see her. Even if it was too late, even if she hated him, he needed to see Kate again. Emma skipped ahead without waiting, confident and carefree. She pushed open the cafe door and ran toward a woman at the counter. Henry followed, hesitating only for a second before stepping inside. The moment his eyes found her, the noise of the world rushed back in. Kate. She stood near the barista, her profile turned slightly as she looked down into her purse. Her hair was a little longer now, with soft waves instead of the straight cut she used to wear. She wore a light blouse and jeans, nothing glamorous, but she had always carried a kind of quiet beauty that made people look twice. When she turned at the sound of the door and saw him, her eyes locked onto his, and everything around them seemed to vanish. For a long second, neither of them moved. It was as if they were caught in time, suspended between past and present. Her lips parted slightly, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to disbelief. "Henry," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded, trying to find words but failing. He hadn't prepared for this. Nothing could have prepared him for this. Kate's gaze dropped instinctively to Emma, who had already begun happily explaining how she'd helped a man outside and how he knew her name and her bracelet. Henry saw the moment it clicked in Kate's eyes, the moment she realized who he was, what this meant. He stepped forward slowly. "Is she mine?" he asked, his voice cracked and raw from the emotion. Kate was silent for a moment, her hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and said quietly, "Yes. Her name is Emma. She's your daughter." Henry's knees felt weak. It was everything he had once been afraid of, and everything he had secretly hoped to hear. Kate sat down at a small table near the window, her fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of a coffee cup she hadn't even sipped from. Her eyes hadn't left Henry since the moment she realized who he was. The weight of his presence was overwhelming, and it felt like the past 5 years had folded in on themselves, bringing back a rush of emotions she had worked so hard to bury: anger, sadness, disbelief, and somewhere deep underneath it all, a flicker of something she didn't want to name yet. Henry sat across from her, visibly shaken, his usually composed and confident demeanor stripped away. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Human. Emma was seated beside her mother, humming quietly to herself as she played with a sugar packet, blissfully unaware of the storm unraveling between the two adults. Kate kept her hand gently resting on her daughter's back, like an anchor grounding her in the moment. Henry, on the other hand, looked like a man who had been tossed into the middle of a life he had never expected to find. He tried to speak, but the words came out awkwardly. "Kate. I don't even know where to begin." She let out a soft, incredulous laugh, not out of humor, but because she genuinely didn't know how to process the fact that he was suddenly here, sitting in front of her after disappearing without a trace 5 years ago. "Try the beginning," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Or try explaining why you left when I needed you most." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, fingers laced together like he was bracing himself. "I was scared," he admitted. "I know that sounds weak. I know it doesn't excuse anything. But I panicked. When you told me you were pregnant, something broke inside me. I kept hearing my father's voice, all the ways he failed us, all the ways he damaged everything he touched. I thought if I stayed, I would end up hurting you. Hurting her. I thought leaving was protecting you." Kate shook her head slowly, bitter disbelief flashing in her eyes. "You disappeared, Henry. No calls. No messages. You changed your number. I thought something had happened to you. Then I realized, nothing had happened. You just chose to disappear." Her voice cracked slightly, and she quickly composed herself. Henry looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. "I looked for you," he said quietly. "After a while. When I started to realize what I'd done. I went to your apartment and it was empty. I tried to reach out, but you were gone. There was no trace of you anywhere." Kate tightened her grip on the coffee cup. "I moved. I had to. I couldn't raise a child in the same place where everything reminded me of being abandoned. I didn't want Emma to grow up feeling like she was some mistake." "She's not," Henry said quickly, lifting his head. His voice was sharp now, filled with regret and conviction. "She's not a mistake. I didn't know what to do then, but I know now. I want to be part of her life. If you'll let me." Kate stared at him, her expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand why now, why after all this time, after all the tears and lonely nights, after watching Emma learn to walk and talk and grow up without ever knowing who her father was. But another part of her saw something different in Henry's eyes, something she hadn't seen before, vulnerability. Not the carefully rehearsed charm she used to fall for, not the ambition or pride. This was a man broken by guilt, desperate for a second chance. It didn't make everything okay, but it made it real. Emma looked up at that moment, as if sensing the shift in the air. "Are you mad, Mommy?" she asked in a small voice. Kate smiled softly and brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. "No, baby. Just surprised." Henry swallowed hard and looked at his daughter, really looked at her, not just the features she had inherited from him, but the warmth, the lightness, the life he had missed out on. "Hi, Emma," he said gently. "I'm Henry. I'm your dad." Emma tilted her head, curious but unafraid. "You look like me," she said, and Henry let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. Kate watched the moment with a strange, aching tightness in her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. There was a storm coming, no doubt, but something had shifted in the air, like the first clear light after days of rain. The hours passed slowly after that first meeting. Kate had given Henry her number, though she hesitated before doing so, as if handing it over meant unlocking a door she had long ago sealed shut. Henry didn't press her for anything more that day, he didn't ask for explanations or forgiveness. Instead, he simply asked if he could see Emma again. Kate didn't give an answer right away. She just nodded once, not out of agreement, but out of exhaustion. Everything about seeing him again had drained her, pulled her back into memories she'd buried so deeply she sometimes forgot they were still alive inside her. In the days that followed, Kate kept things quiet. She needed space to think, to breathe, to sort through the avalanche of emotion that had come crashing down around her. For years, she had built a life that didn't include Henry. She had become a mother alone. She had worked 2 jobs, rocked Emma to sleep during teething nights, sat beside her during fevers and doctor appointments, helped her learn to read and tie her shoes. She had watched Emma grow into a curious, kind-hearted, brilliant little girl who had never once asked why she didn't have a father, at least not until recently. And even then, Kate had answered vaguely, buying time with gentle lies like, "He lives far away," or, "It's complicated." Now she was standing face to face with those lies. Now the man who had left her to figure it all out on her own was back, asking for a place in a life that had moved on without him. The hardest part was that Kate could see he wasn't the same man who had walked away 5 years ago. That version of Henry had been sharp, guarded, too confident for his own good. He hadn't known how to share space with another person, how to admit fear, how to stay. But the man who sat across from her in that coffee shop, the one who had held Emma's hand like it was the most delicate thing in the world, was different. He looked older. Not just physically, but emotionally. There was something raw in his eyes now, something stripped down, like he'd been broken and rebuilt in the years they'd been apart. Eventually, Kate agreed to let them meet again, but only in small, controlled ways. She invited him to the park where she and Emma liked to spend Saturday mornings. He arrived early and brought a bag of pastries, unsure of what Emma liked but hopeful that croissants were a safe bet. Emma ran to him with the same open-hearted energy she gave to everyone she trusted, and Henry looked overwhelmed as he crouched down to hug her, like he couldn't quite believe this was real. At first, Kate stood back and observed. She watched how Henry listened when Emma talked about her favorite cartoon characters, how he knelt down to her level and asked questions instead of offering answers, how he laughed when she told a silly joke and didn't look at his phone once. These were small things, but they